Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to leave a few minutes for Q&A, but in the event you're a little microphone shy, you can hit me up on Twitter. It's at Bonnie Bernstein. I'll keep an eye on it, and I will just share your question rather than you having to stand up and do it by yourselves. So we all know Alexis from being one of the geniuses behind Reddit and all of his experience in the tech space. And Julie has, her bread and butter has been in media and tech and entertainment, from creating a gaming console company to running OT&T before we were just normally calling it streaming for Lionsgate. So, you know, we're dealing with a situation here where there are a few teams in LA. This happens to be number 12. Sports has not been an area of expertise for either one of you, and that's no insult at all to your wife, Alexis, but being married to an athlete does not mean that it is your jam.
Very true.
So I guess my first question is, what's your why? What made you go down the road of founding a women's professional sports team in a market that already has 11 teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's going to be interesting because our answers are actually pretty different. But I was brought into this by Natalie Portman, the actress and activist, whose idea this was. You know, she was an early member of Time's Up with our other co-founding partner, Karen Uhrman. And while they were at Time's Up, they spent a lot of time with the U.S. Women's National Team and their executive director of the PA as they were embarking on their lawsuit against U.S. Soccer. And they got to learn firsthand how incredible these women were off the pitch as well as on the pitch, and then sort of how unfair it was that they weren't getting paid the same or more, right, than their male counterparts. And so when they came up with the idea for Angel City, the idea really was to instill mission into a company as well, right? They ultimately want to try to pay equity, but I think there's a bigger story here about equity in general for women in women's sports, not just on the pay side, but from a media perspective and a broadcast perspective and a platform perspective and a storytelling perspective, right? We know the stats today, you know them, right? 4% of all sports coverage goes to women, right? So how do you grow that as well? So when I came on board, being an athlete growing up and being born and raised in LA, knowing that LA is the city of champions and championship teams, you know, my why was ultimately to drive for equity in every single aspect as it relates to women's sports, because having been an athlete, I worked just as hard. I saw just as great success, but didn't get the credibility of it. And I think I was finally at a position in my career where I knew enough about building community, about building product, and having the backdrop of storytelling of Los Angeles and the incredible sports in Los Angeles, that if we did it differently and saw greater success, we could actually change the conversation. And equity, I felt, is something that is actually within our grasp.
Yeah, and so timely right now based on some of the stuff that's been going on with the U.S. Women's National Team and the push for pay equity, gender equity, and all those sorts of things. Tell me about World Cup 2019 and how transformative that was for you.
I just, like a lot of folks, mouthed off on Twitter one night, and it led me here. It led me to Julie and the team. I was invited, never been a football fan. I played soccer, I don't know, like every kid in the suburbs for like 8-9 years growing up, because my parents wouldn't let me play American football. Smart on their part. And, you know, a buddy of mine just said, hey, dude, you're in Europe. You got to come watch this. The women are playing the French in the quarterfinals of the Women's World Cup. And I was like, sure, why not? I like sports. Let's go see what's happening over there. And I mean, packed crowd. People, fans screaming at the top of their lungs, men, women, kids. I mean, I got a couple of drinks in. I was having a great time, right? And you're watching women who, even though I'd never followed the sport, who I was at least aware of, because culturally, folks like Rapinoe, Alex Morgan had already transcended the sport. So here was the sport. We're back in the U.S. We all kind of are conscious of our women's football team because they're so much better than the men. We know they're really damn good. We know a few of the individuals because they've already transcended the sport. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, dude, why don't these women play in the United States? And he looks at me and he's like, dude, they do. Like, they've gone through a few leagues. This one, it's called the NWSL. And it's a thing back in America. And I'm like, dude, no way. Like, surely I would have heard about this. How can I know the stars of this sport? How do I know the greatness of the women's national team and I don't know about the NWSL? So anyway, I start mouthing off on Twitter about how this is like. Once I started looking at the valuations of the teams and the history of the struggles around it, I'm like, this is such a squandered opportunity. As a businessman, I'm looking at this like, this is absurd. These women are far more marketable than their male counterparts. They are dynamic. They're storytellers online in an age of social media. All this stuff. It just felt really right. But like a lot of things on Twitter, I got my tweets out, I got some replies and sort of forgot about it. But then another few weeks later, some owners had started reaching out. And other people who were sort of curious and sort of around the hoop thinking about this started reaching out. And I had some conversations, didn't go that far. And then got introduced to Julie and the team and realized, okay, like here's a squad that is ready to do this.
It's go time.
Here's a squad that has vision. Let me just take my money. Let's figure out a way to build this. And the real impetus that I left out there, I guess in the middle, was it was a month after, or a few weeks after, and my whole family, we were watching the final. And it had been really hard. Actually, Nat has a similar story. It was really hard for me actually to get an Alex Morgan jersey because I guess they just didn't think men would
For you or for Olympia?
For me.
Okay.
Because I guess they just didn't think men would want a women's player jersey, which is strange.
And
but
you're
okay.
not short either. So
I'm a big fella.
Yeah.
And I wore that jersey to Wimbledon when I watched that match, and it was fascinating to see the reaction it got too, because remember, we were, this is a very American team, very proud. Morgan is sipping tea, and all these British tennis fans were complimenting me on the jersey, and it was quite a moment. And but we're watching this match of the final. Olympia's running around in her jersey, and like any dad, I commented like, wouldn't it be nice to my wife, like if Olympia one day were playing on this team? And without missing a beat, Serena says, not unless they're paying her what she's worth. And I said, okay, challenge accepted. And so I've got like 15, 16 years maybe to try to play a role in helping aggrandize women's football in the US to the point where if Olympia chooses, I mean this half seriously, she'll get paid what she's worth.
So you're saying there's a chance she winds up in soccer rather than tennis?
She'll
We're totally going like the total sidebar
She'll do whatever
here.
she wants to do. But it really stemmed from that. And as an investor and an entrepreneur, I really like being right. And so when you have this perfect storm of being early and right, being able to be high conviction in something when no one else sees it, sort of in the grand scheme, and then to do something that just feels good, like giving my daughter the equal pay she deserves that my wife very rightly helped create in her sport. It was just kismet to meet this team because it was special. There is a standard being set here that isn't just for women's football. It's not just for women's sports. It's for sports, period.
Well, the nice thing is, we're all fans of capitalism here.
Mm.
You are a lifelong entrepreneur, and just at the heart of it, that mix between taking a business and scaling it and getting it over the profitability line, mixed with the equity and the equality and the mission side of this is truly what makes it unique. And it's certainly not, we don't want to do a disservice to any other organization because they all have their social responsibility platforms. But at the very onset, you reference this as a mission-based organization. It's not on first reference a soccer team, like we know what it is. Yeah. So there are all of these different differentiators that I want to dive into from an ownership perspective, from a sponsorship perspective, from a building community perspective. And let's start with the ownership, because I know a lot of times, Alexis, you're dealing with a lot of VC money, and you are probably also dealing with a lot of high net worth folks, ultra high net worth folks who aren't having such a deep conversation about ROI and exit and all that sort of stuff. But when you're dealing with investors who are all over the spectrum, on the entertainment side, from Natalie Portman to Jennifer Garner to Uzo Aduba to Gabrielle Union, who came on as a new investor, to Christina Aguilera, and then you have a whole slew of former U.S. women's national team, and we know ultra high net worth and former U.S. women's national team member are not something you will ever hear in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk about the different types of conversations and the different investment levels and how much you're thinking we don't want to just take your money. We want you to be part, and how can you play a critical role in achieving our goals?
Well, I mean, I think it came across in our fundraising, because we didn't walk in with here's the check size you need to make, or here's the minimum you need to make. We really sold the impact we were making. So to what you were saying earlier, we say every day that we lead with passion and purpose to drive to profitability. We're intentionally building an organization where we're using entertainment to drive impact. Because if we have a positive capital outcome leading with purpose, it absolutely changed the conversation about what's possible. And so when we talk to very early on, traditionally financial investors, they didn't get it. They're like, wait, are we talking about an ROI, and is it in 5 or 10 years, or is this, sort of a nonprofit that's disguised as a sports team? And the idea was like, no, it's both, and we're going to be successful doing both, and we're never going to make a compromise between the two. They had a hard time understanding that. But when you flip the conversation and you talk to Natalie's friends, Eva Longoria, Jessica Chastain, Jennifer Gardner, even like the Julie Fatties and the Abby Wambachs, and say, hey, we're going to use purpose to drive profit. We're going to use our platform to build impact and to build awareness and attention for this. And you need to use your platform, because your platform is significantly better than the NWSL, significantly bigger than Angel City, which doesn't exist yet, and significantly better than the players that we don't have yet, right? If you can draw the attention and start sharing what we're doing, we can then move to hit our sort of financial goals as well, and now you have a financial stake in the outcome. They got it. Like they, as celebrities, they understand how to use their platform for good, but then also to drive their career. And so they understood that this combination of mission and capital. So when they came on board, we had one interview, or so we talked with one investor who was like, okay, well, let's talk about, warrants, and I'll do X, Y, and Z for it. We're like, that's not the way we roll, right? You're going to do all of this because you believe in what it is we're building. And that's effectively what it has. So we have something like, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, I think it's around 99 investors. And I literally cannot think of one that hasn't helped us, advance towards our goals, whether it's introducing us to partners, helping us announce partners, introducing us to new tech companies, building our fan base, and showing up in our community for our service events. There was one day early on when we announced Birdies as our sleeve partner, and we were doing a Zoom call for a bunch of high school students. We're talking about female empowerment and female entrepreneurship. And one of our investors is Becky G. And she calls us and she goes, hey, tomorrow's my birthday, and I want to do something. I want to give back to LA. Like, what are you guys doing? Do you have any events that are coming up that I can participate in? And this isn't for content storytelling. I don't need this broadcast. I just want to do something. And so they see us as an opportunity to help advance their mission as well. And she joined the call with Julie Foudy, and it was pretty incredible. But that's, I think, what makes this unique, is that they intuitively get that you can do both and you don't have to make a choice.
I was asking, we were sitting in the green room beforehand, and I was very curious about what the split is between VC money and individual investors. And what did you say it was?
Majority individuals.
Yeah.
Is it because the conversation's different and VCs kind of can't wrap their head around that?
Okay. So there's a couple sides of this that are problematic, and I try to always keep it 100. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that. The problem with a lot of women's sports organizations is the default mindset that historically many of them have been run is charity. It is, and we heard these conversations early in the NWSL and needed to change because it's insulting. It is absolutely insulting.
It's also insulting that less than 3% of all VC money goes to women. And to me, I kind of wonder if it's all part of the same conversation.
It's similar energy, different vibes. So you have old white dudes running clubs who, maybe they had a granddaughter who was into soccer and they made a few extra bucks with their car dealerships. And I'm not, this may sound like I'm passive aggressively talking about someone specifically. I'm not, but that's the general vibe, right? And they're like, oh yeah, soccer's a fun thing. My granddaughter likes soccer. I'm going to start a soccer team because it's good for society, or it makes my kid. And that default mindset limits your success from jump. And that affects all these other players and the leagues and all this other bullshit. And then on the VC side, it's very interesting because 6 years ago, you saw a boom of venture capital money flowing into esports organizations. I was an early investor in one of them, Cloud9, but there's some other ones, 100 Thieves, which is a tremendous one, FaZe Clan. Some of you are probably looking at me like, what the hell are you talking about? These are clubs where you have mostly teenage boys who play video games competitively. I'm a big fan of esports, very long on esports. But that said, you had people putting money into these clubs in their earliest days when the best sponsors they could get were like Slim Jim. And they were saying, look, these companies are today worth, they're saying 10, 20, $30 million. And one day we believe they can be multi-billion-dollar companies. One, in fact, just was in the talks, I think FaZe Clan, of SPACing for $1 billion.
Oh, wow.
So again, but 6 years ago, a bunch of VCs, top firms, Founders Fund, Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, they're putting money into these esports clubs, and they're saying, yeah, there's a potential here for great outsized return. And I'm looking at women's soccer, and I'm like, okay, wait, well, the women who play it are already icons. The average American already knows who Alex Morgan is. The average American has no fucking clue who any esports athlete is. The average American can watch a soccer match for 30 seconds. A child can watch a soccer match and understand how it works and become a fan. A child all the way to an adult watching League of Legends for the first time, myself included, barely understands what's going on, and I've been playing video games my entire life. There's a much more complexity to the sport versus a truly global sport that's the most popular in the world. You have extremely compelling women athletes who are already their own media brands versus not very telegenic, not very articulate teenage boys, right? Fighting to get Slim Jim to throw some dollars at it. And yet, this one was very easy for VCs to put money into. Why is that? And I have a hunch that this is similar energy but different vibes. And so at the end of the day, what makes me so excited about this is this team is proving that, yeah, the mission and the business are one and the same. And from day one, though, this has to be a successful, a profitable, a viable business endeavor. And the proof is they don't have to be mutually exclusive. The proof is it's actually a huge asset that they're not separate, that they're actually one and the same. Because brands are stepping up and consumers are making the decisions of what brands they want to support, what products they want to buy, based on more than just the product itself, based on the impact it has, based on the values that it stands for.
You just teed up a perfect transition for me.
You're-
Because like when
Please.
you think about, okay, what are the factors in building a strong business case? One of the big things is what's the appetite for brands to support you? So if you were going to give us a quick and dirty state of the sponsorship address.
I would say that Angel City has more sponsorship revenue today than, 2 hands worth of men's professional sports teams. We've booked over $35 million in sponsorship revenue. Our kit we believe is the highest grossing kit of any women's team in the US. And we've done all that while giving 10% of the sponsorship dollars back into the community. So we launched
And that's unique. Like that's part
one
of
else
the
does
deal.
it.
If you're a brand and you're coming on board with Angel City FC, you are obligated to allocate 10% of your spend back into the community. And it can be a social responsibility platform that's already sort of in your wheelhouse, or you're having conversations with them about like, what are some possibilities?
Yeah, so we've built our social impact platform on 3 pillars, which are equity, essentials, and education. And we work with our brands so that they can live sort of authentically and deliver to their customers something that's compelling. So our front of kit partner is DoorDash, right? They care about food insecurity in that last mile. So we find organizations, we use their dashers, we've given out 75,000 meals. We partner with Sprouts Farmers Market on our backup kit. We have done 7 gardens in elementary schools across Los Angeles teaching young kids about nutrition and wellness. We partner with Gatorade to increase women coaches, and we created coaching seminars with them. We've done camps and clinics with kids. So we're able to find ways where our purposes align, and then we take the 10% and give it back to the community, whether it's cash or donations or assets or whatnot. But it was funny because when we announced that, I remember Steph and my head of sponsorships getting phone calls from professional men's teams saying, what are you doing? Like, how are you giving away money before you've even made it? Let alone, like, how did your investors say yes to this? And for us, it wasn't even a question. Every single thing we do has impact. So when we started talking to brands, we launched the sponsorship model. When we started taking seat deposits, we partnered with Nike to give sports bras to young girls in need because we found out that the #1 reason young girls stop playing sports is because they can't afford a sports bra. So for every single seat we sell, we're donating a sports bra to the tune of $22,000. We just gave 1,100 out for International Women's Day a couple days ago down at the bank. So every single thing we do has impact, and then we see the dividends on the revenue side as well.
Can you talk a little bit specifically about the pay scale partnership? And because it plays well into equity and education and sort of the design behind that.
Yeah, I mean, well, as it relates to pay scale, you have to know what's happening in the marketplace. So pay scale allows us to know what are women getting paid, what are men getting paid, how do we strive to equity, and then partner with them so that we can make sure that we're transparent with our team and sort of challenge other people to be transparent with their teams as well.
Yeah. Were you at all involved in the Crypto.com deal?
Barely.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love taking credit for things, but no, barely. We joked earlier, although I was very serious. Like, I want to default fight every tendency. You know, actually, I just try to think of like what would Dan Snyder do in this situation, and then
and do the opposite.
How do you do the exact opposite?
Yeah.
And if I can live my life in this position doing the exact opposite of Dan Snyder, I think things will turn out really well. And so I want to be helpful in places where I can be helpful. But to be clear, like even something like this, which was a industry leading, I don't know, it was a pretty formative deal, right? On the bleeding edge of both technology and business and culture, right?
Well, you know what kind of money they have when you look at the money they put into what is now formerly the Staples Center, now Crypto.com Arena.
And part of the conversation with them, as Julie's been talking about, was about how do we then bring this sort of Web3 literacy and education to a community, especially for girls and underrepresented communities that may be, missing out on the greatest financial revolution we've ever seen. And to be clear, when Julie first proposed this, it was an instant yes, because all of the multi-billion-dollar businesses I've been lucky to either found or invest in early, they all share a similar mindset around being long-term greedy versus short-term greedy. And in that sense, you're creating opportunities to capture value for the long term because you're building relationships with brands where they actually feel like they're literally a part of the community and the team. Why is it? Look, take the NFL. How much does the NFL talk about their women's fans? All the time. The NFL wants to remind you all the damn time how many women love the NFL.
Well, it's half of their fan base, so I would hope they
right?
would be talking about it.
And who controls household spending? Who drives culture? Like, there's a reason. It's because those women fans are really, 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 really valuable. And I think when you start to look at even the philanthropic efforts that leagues traditionally do, it always feels like not an apology, but it feels like a reaction, right?
An afterthought.
And yet, what are sports teams other than like manifestations of communities, right? We have city names right next to the brands. They talk all the time about how, think of all the brand and all the iconography and all the storytelling that sports teams do. It's all about the city and the community and the blah, blah, blah. We'll fucking walk the talk. And so if you're building, the best advantage that women's sports has is the fact that, unfortunately there isn't much of a precedent. And so many of these organizations, like here in the NWSL, you have a blank canvas. And so you get to actually attack these things from first principles. And you don't have a 75-year-old organization to try to turn around. You have a blank canvas to say, well, why are we doing it this way? That doesn't make sense. We should do it this way. And I think the team's done a hell of a job with it. And this is all without playing a single match. First match on Saturday. But like,
shameless plug.
That's special. And I think that momentum will continue to drive more and more inspiration and motivation. And I expect Angel City to motivate, like I said, not just on the women's side, but every sports organization.
Well, you talk about the size of the community that's been built before the players ever step foot on the pitch. Mm-hmm. What have been some of the more successful strategies in bringing the community in, making them feel like they have a voice, mm-hmm. and they have ownership, they have equity, passion in the form of, equity in the form of passion invested in a team that hasn't played until next Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is really unique is that the community existed before we even launched Angel City. So the first match I went to was an LAFC LA Galaxy match with Kara and Natalie, and in the center of LAFC's 3252, which is their incredible supporters group, was a woman waving a flag that said, "Bring the NWSL to LA." Oh, wow. So we knew that if we build it, they would come because they were already there. And so when we started, before we even announced Angel City, I think a day before, I called her and her husband and said, hey, it was a pretty emotional conversation. And I was like, you're such a fan. Like, why do you care about women's sports? And why do you care about the NWSL? And she was talking about it and how how they just came back from, I think they got married in Paris during the 2019 World Cup. And I said, well, I have something to tell you. I said, because of you and your, in your community, we are bringing a team here, and we're announcing it tomorrow. And it was sort of like this kind of unbelievable moment where they felt a sense of ownership, and and they felt like they played a role, which they did, in bringing Angel City to LA. And so that was just the beginning of us then trying to reach out to the community, build with the community, and find out what's important to them. So input into our color scheme, input into our crest, right? Making them feel ownership of what we're building. Arguably, it was very difficult because the pandemic started. So what typically would have been going out and creating a ton of events, we all had to do over Zoom. And so, but we didn't let that stop us. We continued to build community. And I think also, leading with purpose and being very clear about what it is we stand for. We're here to set higher expectations. We're here to rewrite the script. We're here to use entertainment to drive impact. We're here to ultimately drive for equity for the players, are all things that resonated with them. So it allowed them to create a deeper relationship with us. And then every chance we got, we would do equipment drives or food distribution drives. We would invite them. They would come. They would start holding events. We would support them. And we really kind of built the club together.
Well, it's wonderful to have community, and it's important for them to feel like they have a voice. But I remember when you guys were doing your head coaching search, and rumors started cropping up that the predominantly female-owned Angel City FC was going to hire a guy.
Might have a male head coach.
Might.
Yeah.
Do you feel because you are so mission focused, is there part of you that feels like you have this personal responsibility to ensure as many women as possible are in leadership positions, and obviously you're sporting director, you're head coach, they're important roles with the organization.
Obviously I'm sitting next to Alexis, Ohanian, who's our controlling owner. We didn't want to build an organization that was purely women, right? We wanted to bring men along on the journey. They obviously have something valuable to contribute, and the more that they're on board and buying the capitalistic part of this and not the charity part of this, it helps us advance the sport, right? And so when it relates to building our team, we want to have a diverse team. We want to have diverse viewpoints on the leadership team, on the soccer side of the house. So we wanted to build a diverse team that's reflective of our community, that's reflective of global soccer. Although ironically, every single person on our coaching staff has an accent. I don't know how that happened. All of our players are going to have British accents by the time the season's over. So that was challenging. We interviewed both male and females for our head coaching role, as we've done with every single position. We do feel like we have a sense of responsibility to create more pathways for women, and it is incredible that we have a female sporting director in Annie Luco, and a female head coach in Freya Coombe. Our assistant coach and head of performance director is Robbie Udberg, and we have a pretty diverse team from a nationality perspective, an experience perspective, and a gender perspective. Yes, it is a challenge, but part of it is sort of educating the community that we're not doing this alone, and this isn't, you want the best person for the role at the end of the day. Our job is to make sure that we interview everyone, possible, and then make the best selection, and you should hopefully support that.
You've kind of cornered the market on building community. Were there
seen some things.
And were there any learnings from Reddit that, I know you want to be more of a hands-off lead investor, but still, like all of the investors, you come to the table with really valuable skill sets, and building Reddit, which is massive global community, that's an important part of this process. So is there anything that you took from that is applicable to building community here?
Well, I think from jump, I have tried to warn Julie that being CEO of a community-led business requires you to be as much a business leader as a sort of head of state or sort of community manager. It is, and for 16 years I was telling people about this, they'd be like, whatever. But I think this new generation of companies being started today, certainly in Web3, certainly a sports franchise, you have to be, 51% still a business leader, because at the end of the day, if the business can't exist, then everyone loses. But 49% of decision-making of that responsibility actually is a kind of head of state role. It's about knowing that there is a community here. Some days they're going to be more happy with you than others. None of them are employees at the end of the day, so your relationship with them is a unique one. They are quote-unquote customers, but they have a much bigger role than that. And in an age of social media, you're hearing from them, you're engaging with them literally 24/7. And so balancing that it's going to be a superpower of the next generation of CEOs. Mm-hmm. And if you get it right, you're never going to always get it right, but if you're trending in the right direction, the power it unlocks is massive. And so I'm always trying to, I hope, like, I've been sort of canceled on Reddit countless times at this point, from even the most insignificant, slightest change in month 3, where I decided to tweak the way the up arrows and down arrows looked. And it was a front page story about what an idiot I was and how dare I change these arrows, like any number of things. And so at the end of the day, you have to sort of balance the reactive nature of your most passionate fans with a sort of steady hand on the wheel, because you can't veer too far in any one direction. Yeah. And so it's a delicate balance, but I think Julie's done a heck of a job with it so far.
Well, so interestingly enough, 776, which is your VC that is part of this latest round, is also the lead investor for a platform called Gloria,
yes,
which on Twitter you pegged as the go-to app for all things football. So on a macro investment level for you, how much are you thinking about injecting money into other platforms that help build a larger soccer community? Or any other tech or whatever it might be that supports soccer?
I know this is weird for someone who was not a fan of football until a couple years ago, but I think it's a few things. One, obviously most popular sport in the world. I'm very long on sport in particular, because if you look at every form of entertainment, it is all cannibalized or competitive with social media, except for sport. So the reason TikTok eviscerated Quibi, despite having A-list
more
talent,
money than God.
more money than God,
yes, it's ridiculous.
Was because when you're talking about distracting yourself for a few minutes in the day, no centralized team, no matter how well funded, could compete with millions and millions and millions of innovative teenagers just doing dances, right? It is. If you're spending an hour on TikTok, you're actually spending an hour deciding not to watch Netflix or Quibi or what have you. Sport is unique in that it is the only entertainment that actually has this real FOMO. Even if you miss Meg Thee Stallion on tour this year, which I would not recommend, she's amazing, you can always say to yourself, well, I'll see her next year. I may miss that concert here in Austin, but I'll go see her in Houston or whatever. Sport, if you miss that match, like Saturday, Angel City's first match, part of the Challenge Cup, you miss it. You missed out on a part of history. You missed out on a part of the cultural zeitgeist.
And you want to be a part of that conversation, and you're using your second screen as part of that experience.
And so every other form of entertainment is going to get their milkshake drunk, in part by social media and the democratization of content creation, except for sport. Because when you watch that little boy recreating the Kristen Press goal, see what I did there? They're not taking value away from Kristen. They're not making you say, oh, I don't need to watch her next week. They're making you say, I need to watch her. I need to remember to make sure to watch that match.
Kristen, by the way, will be the star of the team. She's a native Los
Angelino.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And,
she's legit.
And so I'm just looking at this going, okay, well, pragmatically, and you're going to see, football is just going to continue to march even more popular. And then and the last part of this, the CEO of Gloria, Victoire, her purpose, her why, is in part because the global sport of football is still very male dominated.